Hello and welcome to the new series of Drishti IAS. I am Pooja Divedi, and in this segment today, we are going to discuss all about the Conference of Parties 26 with respect to the hits and misses of different climate agreements and climate bondages. This topic is very important from the perspective of prelims and also from the perspective of GS mains papers. Listen, one thing is very important, especially in the upcoming prelims exam, if I'm talking about UPSC as well as state PCS. Pay very close attention to different agreements because it is very important to keep facts as well as concept in mind. Now, as if you have appeared for the paper of UPSC prelims and different state PCS, you can see very integrated structure of the prelims exam, which is based on both facts and concepts. So you can't say, okay, I will understand the concept and the facts are not necessary, and vice versa. Okay. So do pay attention to each and everything that we are going to cover over here. Let's start with the different points that we are going to discuss. These are the different points. Let's begin with the news. So as we are moving towards the convenience of the climate agreement and different conference of parties. So it's very important to understand the concept of COP26. Because there have been conference of parties before COP26, but different conference of parties, as they dictated, those rules were not followed. Many countries, almost more than 90% of the countries were falling short of their commitment. So understand that COP26 is very important in a post-pandemic era, and here we will discuss about what was expected of the countries to achieve and why they fell back and could not achieve those commitments. And another thing is that why is it important to have a more robust plan when it comes to technology and finances for the decades to come. Okay, so as you can see, the hits and misses. Before we begin, let's understand a bit about Conference of Parties. Conference of Parties 26. This year, UK holds the presidency. UK, United Kingdom. Okay, and this year's presidency is important in the sense that first that we understood the things that have happened to climate since the of course outbreak of the pandemic and since the reintroduction of economic activities. That means more carbon emissions, more greenhouse gas emissions. So UK has a big responsibility when we talk about the presidency. Conference of Parties is a concept under United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This was itself formed in the year 1994, and since the year 1995, more than 190 member countries are meeting on an annual basis to take care of the environment by having a meet. The Conference of Party, as the name suggests, it's a meeting of different member countries to understand the commitments, to have a proper rule book for achieving those commitments. So, since the year 1995, this is happening. And remember, COP comes under, it's a concept or an institutionalized framework for the parties to meet under United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Okay, and the presidency actually it rotates every year when we talk about different regions. It's not like that for 190 plus members, it's going to be every time one member country is going to hold the chair. It rotates area wise. Alright, so there are different regions like European, Latin American, like that. Okay, so as you can see, UK is holding the presidency for 26 and it's going to be convened in Glasgow. Remember this as well. This could be a factual prelims question for state pieces as well as UPSC. And if we talk about the importance of this meet, it's almost if I can be optimistic enough, it almost suggests the entire global scenario that pandemic is receding. Maybe it's not, but it's still, as the WHO director has said, that it's far from over because 50,000 deaths are still being registered every week due to COVID pandemic. But still, there are hopes and it's important for our future. So let's move forward and talk about what India has, what problems and what expectations does India have when it comes to COP26. First, understand that India has a huge expectation when we talk about the consensus on unresolved issues of Paris Agreement Rulebook, long-term climate, finance and market-based mechanism. So, as it is going to be convened from the 31st of October to 12th of March, till 12th of March, and the Prime Minister of India is going to attend. So, it's very important that India has certain things in mind, and the importance has actually risen for India. And India has proved itself time and again to be in an achiever category actually when we talk about the nationally determined contributions. Similarly, India has expectations from other countries as well. So, consensus on unresolved issues of the Paris Agreement Rule Book. Okay, so there should be a rule book and the rule book has been finalized. There are certain unresolved issues and that should also be finalized according to India. Long-term climate finance, that means financing the climate change in the sense that having those technologies which are important for every country to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions globally. And that is very important. How we will provide finances for those technology. And market-based mechanism, that is carbon market, carbon credit market, all these needs to be taken into account. And sustainable land use, energy transition, low emission vehicle transition, climate finance and adaptation. These are some of the points that are going to be taken up in COP at COP26. Okay, let's move forward and talk about the International Solar Alliance. Coalition, Disaster, Resilient Infrastructure Leadership Group for Industry Transition, call for action on adaptation and resilience and mission innovation. So these are actually important from the Indian perspective. This particular basic difference is that it's important from the Indian perspective and hence it is important from the world's perspective because India is one of the emerging economies. So International Solar Alliance and everything is going to be on the table. Let's talk about what are India's core demands. So India's core demands actually are relevant to these topics only. We have already discussed about it. Secondly, that climate funding is very important. Climate funding, that means transfer of technology from developed to developing countries in order for curbing the amount of greenhouse gas emission for countries such as India, for countries such as China. So these are the core demands. Now, there are certain points that have been kept in mind at COP26. There are 4 major goals. First is net zero by 2050. That means net zero carbon emissions or greenhouse gas emissions, not carbon, greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. If you have appeared for UPSC prelims, there was a question, what is net zero emission? And there were 2 options. So, net zero emission is the overarching theme of COP26. Keep this in mind. And net zero emission actually means absorbing the carbon or the greenhouse gas which has been emitted through the process of usage of energy or transportation. So whatever the amount of greenhouse gas has been emitted, it should be absorbed. So this is the first thing. And to secure global net zero by mid-century 2050 and keep 1.5 degrees within reach. Okay. And this is, if we talk about the 1.5 degrees, this is comparatively from the pre-industrial levels. Okay. Also, countries are being asked to come forward with ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets that align with reaching net zero by the middle of the century. So, if you are preparing for the examination, of course, you also might have, if your strategy is correct, you might have a buffer period. So, this is that buffer period. Buffer period in the sense, if I have a long-term plan, I will also have short-term plans so that I can reach my long-term goal. Okay. So 2030 is also a very important year in order to make sure that the net zero emission target is achieved by the year 2050. So how will it be possible? First, we have to reduce our dependence on coal. Okay, coal is the king in the energy mix. I have reiterated time and again. So we have to reduce our dependence on coal. Secondly, we have to invest more in renewable energy. Thirdly, we have to reduce and, if possible, talk about deforestation and take deforestation to level 0, because it is very important to sequester whatever greenhouse gas is being emitted, and trees help in sequestering and absorbing carbon for a long period of time. So these are certain things. And sector by sector transitions should happen. It shouldn't be like, okay, we have started with our renewable energy transition in every sector at once. It is not possible. Also, it is not feasible. So first, we should decarbonize our energy sector. We should decarbonize transport sector. We should try to have green buildings. So all this should go hand in hand. Okay, adapt to protect communities and natural habitat. This is another goal. That means proper rehabilitation and proper transition is important when we talk about switching from one energy source to another, so that everything is balanced. Also, mobilize finance. In order to have proper technology, we need to, of course, spend money. If we are not going to have proper money to have the technology, how will we transit? Okay. So, developed countries must make good on their promise to mobilize at least $100 billion in climate finance, that is per year, because developed countries are historical emitters, right? They started developing early, and that is why more responsibility is on them, not the developing countries, because countries such as India and China, they started getting developed by 1980s and 90s. Till then, developed countries have already emitted a lot of greenhouse gas. So, of course, by fair principles, it should be like this. Okay, so let's move forward. Work together to deliver. Okay, so we need to work together with the help of developed countries. The developing countries can achieve more technology so that they can finance their own technological advancement. And of course, the developed countries have a responsibility towards the developing and the least developed countries, because they do not have the proper amount of finances in order to reduce their global greenhouse gases and global emissions. Okay, so another important task at the COP is to finalize the Paris rulebook. In finalize in the sense, finality is something when the unresolved issues are also taken into account and have a proper communication over them so that everything can be settled. Moreover, if we talk about from Kyoto to COP26, now why is this important? This is important because one more question was there, if I remember correctly, from state pieces itself, that it was asked which, I'm just taking a guess, which, properly I don't remember the name, but which convention or which agreement relates to carbon greenhouse gas emissions or carbon dioxide emission. So it was Kyoto Protocol. Why? Because in 1987 Montreal, it was related to basically ozone depleting gases, and it was another one, that is Kyoto Protocol. So Kyoto Protocol is of course the correct answer. And Kyoto Protocol, before this, COP happened in Berlin. COP 1. Okay, so it happened in Berlin, but more robustly, if we talk about the greenhouse gas emissions, it started from Kyoto Protocol. And it took into account the importance of carbon emission, and it took into cognizance the ill effects of greenhouse gas emissions. Then in 2002 at COP8, New Delhi Declaration, it talked about the responsibility of the developed nations towards the poorer countries to help them in order to achieve their own goals. And at COP13, which happened in Bali, Indonesia, it's important for you to remember. So, importance in the sense that it could be like, what was the year or which declaration deals with the responsibility of developed countries toward the poorer countries, so that they can have their goals when we talk about climate change. So, it's Delhi Declaration of the year 2002. So it's like that. Okay. In 2007, Bali Declaration, at Bali, the parties agreed on the Bali Roadmap and Bali Action Plan. Now that charted a way towards post-2012 outcomes. That means post the commitment period of Kyoto Protocol. We will discuss about that as well. So Kyoto Protocol, basically, it took into account major 37 economies. 37 economies were taken into cognizance, and it was asked of them to reduce their carbon emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, by 5% comparatively from 1990 to the commitment period of 2008 and 12. So basically it was like this: between 1990 and 2008 and 12, these 37 countries were asked to reduce their greenhouse gas emission by 5%, and the comparative years were 1990 to 2008 and 12. So it was like that. So what happens after 2012? It was talked about in Bali. Okay. And the plan has 5 major categories. What are these? Shared vision, mitigation, adaptation, technology and financing. In 2010, at COP16 at Cancun, this resulted in the Cancun Agreement, a comprehensive package by governments to assist developing nations in dealing with climate change with the help of finances and technology transfer. Now here only the Green Climate Fund, the technology mechanism and the Cancun adaptation framework were established. Okay. So in at COP 2017 in Durban, it was also agreed upon that we need a more robust plan, which gave birth to the Paris Agreement in 2015. Now, it was important because it is, first of all, don't get confused, it is actually legally binding. It's not non-legally binding. Many students do comment, no, this is non-legally binding. If you go to the official website, it's actually legally binding. Okay? And this treaty, it talks about that it's very important to curb our emission before the 22nd century. In 21st century, before 2100, we need to curb our emissions, and that's below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably at 1.5 degrees Celsius if you compare them to pre-industrial level. Under this only we have our nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contributions are obligatory in nature. It has been very flexible when we talk about the obligations under Paris Agreement, because every country was asked, and because of the common and differentiated responsibilities, it was asked of every country to have proper roadmap for themselves. So India also has it, that we will reduce our greenhouse gas emission from 33 to 35% of our GDP. If we compare 2 years, first is 2005, second is 2030. Okay, so it was agreed by India. Again, it was another thing that we will have our energy from installed renewable capacity, that is 40%. 40% of the energy should come from renewable energy. Again, 2.5 to 3 billion metric ton of CO2 emissions will be sequestered, and decarbonization will be there with the help of trees and tree covers. So it's very important that we understood that we need a flexible roadmap. Maybe this is one of the reasons accountability is not very robust. Again, at the Marrakesh Agreement on Climate Change, it was held in 2016. In 2017, Bonn, Germany, what happened? Fiji was the president here. Although it happened in Bonn, but for the first time ever, an island country was the president of this. So Fiji was the president of Bonn at the Bonn Convention in 2017, and it was actually claimed and declared, not claimed, but declared by the US, one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases, that they are not interested to be a party to the Paris Agreement. But now officially it has entered back into the Paris Agreement. So remember Fiji, okay? In 2018, at Katowice, Poland, of course, the rule book, this was also Paris rule book was being negotiated and it was finalized. At Madrid, finalized in the sense certain unresolved issues are still there. At Madrid, Spain in 2019, there were no concrete plans regarding the growing climate urgency, and hence after that we all know rest is history after the outbreak of the pandemic. Now, what went wrong with the process? First is there has been delayed operationalization of Kyoto Protocol. Why? Because till 2005, many countries did not ratify. They had signed, but they did not ratify. Ratification and signing is different in the sense that signing, if I am signing an agreement, that means I have an intent that I will abide by all these points, whichever the other countries are also abiding by. Okay? Or there are certain provisions which relates to my part, I will abide by those. This is signing. I have signed and I have the intent. But legislation basically talks about ratification. If I have given a legal institution to those promises, then I am ratifying the treaty. Okay? So this is the difference, that I have a legislation in my home country to abide by these rules. This is called ratification. Okay? Also, secondly, we need to understand that it was just a modest demand. Modest demand what? 5% of reduction was needed by 37 countries. And it was so modest that it was actually not very expected of these countries. Very few countries actually took into account the 5% reduction. That was Germany, UK, that was a part of the European Union, and European Union. And after the fall of the Soviet, there was a reduction in greenhouse gas emission. It was a reduction at 22%, well below the 5% modest demand. And of course, after that, the countries such as India, China, Brazil, South Africa, they started emerging as leading economies after the historical economies of US and USSR. So what happened? Those were not covered under the Kyoto Protocol. Those were not having any sort of basic responsibilities which the historical emitters had. So that is why what happened? It happened so that those countries were also trying to become emerging economies, become developed economies. They were getting their economy more robustly on track and they were emitting. So in 2007, China replaced the US as the largest greenhouse gas emitter. And in order to have those countries also into the ambit of responsibility, common and differentiated responsibility started to occur, because historical emitters have emitted a lot. If we talk about the time range, this is the time range of greenhouse gas emission. Historical emitters such as USSR, US, UK, they emitted till here. And major proportion was that. And this is just the smaller proportion, although every country is trying to have their say. But one thing that we should keep in mind is historical emitters are historical emitters. And most of the countries, we have just discussed about this, fast emerging economies remained a challenge. And if we talk about since the year 1990 to the commitment period, in fact, the emission was such that it was 40% above. So you can see that emerging economies in this particular part of the decade, they have actually played a huge role when we talk about contribution in greenhouse gas accumulation. Okay, so this also has been discussed, historical emission and Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement, I have already talked about it, and this is just for your remembrance. Let's move forward and talk about this graph. See, 2012 to comparatively the 2012 target and the actual, what was expected and what was achieved. So US was expected to reduce their emission by 7%, but they could do it only by not even 1%, but 0.13%. Again, Japan, minus 6%, 13.16%. This was good. Canada, minus 6%, 24.54%. But look at European Union, and as you can see, it was actually short of what was expected according to the scientific economy. Okay, and there are emission reduction targets for US. 26 to 28% by 2025 from 2005 levels. Similarly, we have, of course, Brazil, that is 37% by 2025 from 2005 levels, 43% by 2030. Now, this is the entire emission reduction target. What was observed in 2018, if we talk about US, it's like 10% reduction from 2005. It was stock taking was being done. 22% reduction from 1990 if we talk about European Union. Australia, similarly, you can take a screenshot. This is available in the Indian Express as well. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about the challenges. First challenge is the finance. Lack of financial support. In 2009, the Secretary of State of the US declared that $100 billion per year will be mobilized. But as the claims have been, the mobilization is not a lot for technological support. So finances remain a challenge. Technological impediments are there for smaller countries, for developing countries, because of technology transition will not take place. The poorest of the poor countries, the leading or emerging economies, they will continue to remain. They will continue to have a proper accumulation of greenhouse gases. They can't actually afford energy from renewable sources because they do not have the finances for that. Political will is missing because India right now is basically the world's third largest emitter, and it hasn't agreed to net zero deadline because of the lack of technology, because of the lack of proper funding. Of course, political will rise only when proper funding will be there, and basically adaptation fund is a lot. So political will have to get robust by funding itself. Carbon markets, they also need to have a proper support structure for developing and developed countries so that the countries which are able to reduce their emissions can help the other countries which do not have more finances, but at least they should have some market to buy and sell the carbon credits. Okay, let's move forward and talk about the way forward. Technology robustness. Technology is a must for adaptation. Adequate finance. How? Healthy carbon credit market. Okay, I have already told you about this. Again, India needs to go beyond the $100 billion demand and focus on tangible deliverables. In the sense, I might have the finances, but if I can't deliver, what is the entire point? So, deliverables will also need to be taken into account. The promises which I am making should be followed and fulfilled. And indigenous technology is a lot. It's important, especially for Atmanirbhar Bharat. We cannot rely on developed countries all the time. We can take in the initial period, but eventually, in order to also take care of our forex reserves, foreign currency reserves, we need to indigenize the technology. Okay. Now, let's move forward. And this is a news piece I added, that carbon dioxide emissions in 2020 above decadal average. Okay. So, as you can see, carbon dioxide has been emitted, which is above the average level of the entire decade. So, it should, of course, be taken into account at COP26 as well. Let's move forward and talk about our mains-based question. With respect to the COP26, shed a light on the expectations of a post-pandemic world for net zero emission in 250 words. So, please write it. That's it for today. Tomorrow we shall meet again with another segment. Until then, stay updated and thank you so much for watching.